I never thought I'd be the one to walk away from my family's legacy. It had been drilled into me since childhood. Our business was more than a name, more than a paycheck. It was tradition. It was sacrifice. It was supposed to be my future. But after everything they put me through, after the years of unpaid labor and empty promises, I finally understood something they never did. A legacy isn't worth saving if it destroys the people meant to carry it forward. Growing up, my life revolved around the family restaurant. It wasn't just a job, it was a birthright. My grandfather built the first location from nothing but a rented storefront and a recipe he refused to write down. He worked from sunrise to midnight, crafting meals that had people lining up around the block. By the time he passed, the restaurant had expanded to multiple locations, a testament to his hard work. My father and uncle inherited the business, but there was one massive problem. Neither of them had the faintest idea how to run it. They weren't businessmen. They were dreamers, riding on the nostalgia of what my grandfather had built. They spent money they didn't have, made impulsive decisions, and treated the business like their personal playground. And when things went south, when the numbers didn't add up or the staff quit mid-shift, guess who they turned to? Me. At first, it was framed as helping out. "It's just a few hours after school," my father would say, patting me on the back as he handed me a mop. "It's good experience," my uncle would chime in, waving me toward the kitchen where I'd spend hours scrubbing pots taller than I was. I was 10 years old when it started, sweeping floors and wiping down tables. By 12, I was handling weekend shifts. By 15, I was fixing problems they couldn't be bothered to notice. And I wasn't getting paid. Ever. "Family doesn't charge family," Dad would say anytime I brought it up. But that rule only seemed to apply to me. My cousin, Theo, Uncle's pride and joy, never worked a single shift. He was too busy studying or networking, which, as far as I could tell, meant partying with his friends while I pulled double shifts to cover for staff that never showed up. One summer, I was woken up at dawn, told to come in because one of the cooks had quit. I spent 14 hours in the kitchen, sweating over the grill, running plates to tables, doing everything short of running the place myself. At the end of the night, exhausted and sore, I asked my dad if I could take the next day off. He laughed. "Take a day off from what? You're not working a real job." That was how it always was. No matter what I did, it was never enough. I was expected to pick up the slack, to be proud of the legacy I was keeping alive. But I wasn't keeping anything alive. I was a glorified workhorse, forced into a role I never wanted. It wasn't until I turned 18 that I realized how trapped I was. I had spent almost a decade working without recognition, without payment, and without a single word of appreciation. And when I told my father I wanted to leave, that I wanted to go to college and study business for myself, he acted like I had committed treason. "Why would you throw away everything we built?" he asked, his voice sharp with disappointment. "What have I built?" I shot back. "I don't even own a piece of this place. I just work here, for free." "You'll run it one day," he said like it was some kind of reward. "You and Theo, together." Theo. The same Theo who didn't know the difference between a ledger and a menu. The same Theo who had never touched a dirty dish in his life. That was when I understood. This business wasn't mine. It never was. It belonged to them, and I was just another tool they were using to keep it from collapsing. So I left. It wasn't easy. My father called me selfish. My uncle accused me of abandoning the family, and my mother cried like I had betrayed them all. But I was done. I took out loans, applied for scholarships, and worked part-time jobs to put myself through school. And for the first time in my life, I was free. I focused on marketing, ironic, considering how badly my family needed someone who understood it. I studied branding, consumer behavior, digital outreach. I learned how to build something from the ground up, not with blind loyalty, but with strategy, with planning, with purpose. And the best part? Every effort I put in was for me, not them. But they never let me go completely. The call started my second year of college. At first, they were just check-ins, questions about my studies, casual guilt-tripping. "We're so busy without you," my dad would say, as if I had abandoned some great responsibility. Then, the requests started creeping in. "Could you come by just for the weekend? We're short-staffed." "No. We could really use your help." Business is struggling. Still no. They never understood that I didn't owe them my time anymore. And for years, I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had escaped. But legacies don't die so easily. And when my family called me years later, desperate, I made a mistake. I answered. I should have ignored the call. I should have let it go to voicemail, just like I had all the others. But something in my father's voice, the way it lacked its usual arrogance, made me pause. "We're in trouble," he admitted. No pretense, no fake bravado. Just raw, unsettling truth. For a moment, I considered hanging up. I owed them nothing. Every time I had asked for fairness, for payment, for even a fraction of the respect I had earned, they had dismissed me. But something in me, maybe the ghost of obligation, maybe just morbid curiosity, made me ask, "How bad is it?" Silence. Then a slow exhale. We had to close 3 locations. That hit harder than I expected. For all their incompetence, the business had survived decades. I had never imagined they'd actually let it sink. "That's a lot," I said carefully. Dad hesitated before muttering, "The bank's threatening to take the rest." I should have felt vindicated. This was what happened when they refused to listen, when they treated the business like a family heirloom instead of something that needed actual management. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was exhaustion. I rubbed my temples, leaning back in my desk chair. "And what do you expect me to do about it?" I finally asked. "We need someone who knows what they're doing," he said. "We need you." It was the one thing I had waited years to hear. Not guilt, not manipulation, just an honest admission that they couldn't handle it. But it was too late. I had built something for myself. I had a career, stability, a life that didn't revolve around their dysfunction. Still, I found myself saying, "If I come back, I'm not doing it for free." "We'll pay you," he rushed to say. "No," I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. "I want ownership." There was a pause, then a bitter laugh. "You want a stake in the business?" "If I'm saving it, I want a piece of it." The old version of me, the one who spent his teenage years scrubbing grease traps and missing out on everything a normal kid should experience, would have caved at the first sign of approval. But I wasn't that kid anymore. Dad hesitated. "I'll talk to your uncle." "You do that," I said, already knowing how that conversation would go. Uncle would throw a fit. Theo, golden child that he was, would probably scoff at the idea of giving up control. And yet, they had no other option. 2 days later, Dad called back. Begrudgingly, he said, "We'll give you 40%. I exhaled slowly. Not perfect, but enough to get my foot in the door. Enough to make sure they couldn't just use me and throw me away again. "I want full control over operations," I added. Another beat of silence. Then, "Fine. Final thing. I want Theo out." Dad scoffed. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. That's not an option." I almost laughed. "Then neither am I." It took another 2 weeks of back and forth, but in the end, I got everything I wanted. Theo would stay in name only, a figurehead they could parade around to save face, but he wouldn't have any real power. I could work with that. When I finally walked back into the restaurant, it felt like stepping into a relic of the past. The dining room was outdated, the menu bloated with items that no one actually ordered, and the kitchen was barely holding together. The employees looked drained, and morale was at an all-time low. And then there was Theo. I found him in the back office, feet kicked up on the desk, phone in hand. He barely looked up when I walked in. "Welcome back," he muttered, typing something on his screen. I took a deep breath. "You're done here." That got his attention. He looked up, blinking. "What?" "You heard me. Clean out your desk." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Dad won't let you." I don't answer to him anymore. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "You can't just." "I can. And I am." I stepped forward, grabbing a stack of invoices off the desk. "This place is drowning, and you're dead weight." Theo clenched his jaw, staring at me like he was waiting for me to back down. But I didn't, because I wasn't the kid they used to push around anymore. After a long, tense moment, he pushed himself up from the chair, shoving past me on his way out. "You think you're so much better than us," he muttered. I didn't bother responding. I had work to do, and unlike them, I knew how to actually get things done. The first week back was chaos. Worse than I expected. They hadn't just let the business run itself into the ground. They had buried it. The books were a disaster. The suppliers were overcharging them, and the customer base had shrunk to a fraction of what it used to be. The staff was overworked, undertrained, and just as fed up as I had been all those years ago. And the worst part? My father and uncle still refused to accept how bad things had gotten. "We just need to remind people we're here," Dad insisted during one of our first meetings. "Yeah," Uncle nodded. "Maybe a new sign out front? Or a commercial?" I stared at them, wondering if they were joking. They weren't. "The problem isn't the sign," I said, barely restraining my frustration. "The problem is that this place has been running on fumes for years. You have no marketing, no online presence, and the menu is a mess. The service is slow because you refuse to hire enough people, and the food quality is inconsistent." Dad waved a dismissive hand. "We've always done things this way. And that's why you're failing." Uncle scoffed. "You think you're some kind of expert now?" I leveled a stare at him. "Yes, that's why you called me." He didn't like that answer. I started with the basics. I overhauled the menu, cutting down the bloated list of dishes no one ordered and focusing on what actually worked. I restructured the kitchen workflow, making things more efficient so we could push out food faster without sacrificing quality. But the biggest fight was over the marketing. Social media was a foreign concept to them. The restaurant didn't even have a functional website, just an ancient page with a blurry photo of the storefront and a phone number that half the time no one even answered. When I proposed launching an online presence, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Dad scoffed. "People don't choose a restaurant based on a video," he said. I pulled up a competitor's Instagram, showing him a post that had thousands of likes and comments. "Actually, they do. And right now, the only thing people see when they look up this place are bad reviews from 5 years ago." He grumbled, but let me do what I wanted. He had no choice. I hired a photographer, set up professional shots of the food, and started running promotions online. Within 2 weeks, foot traffic picked up. People started coming in, tagging the restaurant in posts. Suddenly, we were on people's radar again. But not everyone was happy. "This isn't how we do things," Uncle complained. "It is now," I said. Ryan, because of course he was still hanging around, was the loudest critic. "This feels like a lot of work," he said, leaning against the counter while watching me set up a loyalty rewards program. "Can't we just do something easier? Like a raffle or a giveaway?" I turned to look at him, expression blank. "A raffle? Yeah, people love free stuff." I almost laughed. "That's your big idea? Just give things away?" "Why not?" He shrugged. "It's simpler." Dad nodded in agreement, and I had to remind myself to breathe. "This is why you're failing," I said, voice steady but firm. "You don't want to put in the work. You don't want to fix the foundation. You just want a shortcut. And that's why everything is falling apart." Ryan looked annoyed, but I ignored him. I had bigger things to deal with. Slowly, things started turning around. Customers were coming back. The atmosphere felt lighter, like people actually wanted to be there again. Staff morale improved. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Then I found out what Dad and Uncle were really planning. I was working late one night, going through invoices, when I overheard them talking in the office. "Once things are stable, we can ease him out," Uncle said. "Yeah," Dad agreed. "He's done his part. Ryan can step up after that." I stood there, frozen. Ryan. Again. They had never planned on keeping me around. They had just used me to clean up their mess. The rage that filled me was cold and absolute. I had given them everything, again. And just like before, they were ready to toss me aside the second I stopped being convenient. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and smiled. Fine. If they wanted to play games, I'd show them just how much power I really had. They thought they could use me? They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I walked into the restaurant like nothing had changed, because for them, nothing had. They still thought they were in control. They still thought I was just some pawn, a temporary fix until they could slide their golden boy Ryan into place. They were wrong. I spent the next few weeks tightening my grip on the business. Every change I made, every system I implemented, was designed to ensure that when I walked away, they wouldn't be able to undo it. I renegotiated supplier contracts, switching to vendors that offered better pricing and higher quality ingredients. I cut out the deadweight, employees who were just collecting a paycheck while doing the bare minimum. And I made sure every major decision was tied to my name, to my vision. Then, I got to work on the finances. They hadn't realized it yet, but they had already lost control. Their desperation had forced them to sign over 40% of the business to me, thinking it was a temporary deal. But I knew better. I knew their weaknesses. I knew that when money was tight, when things got rough, they would come to me first. So I made myself indispensable. And then, just as quietly, I made my exit plan. It started with Ryan. I had tolerated his uselessness long enough, but after overhearing their plans to hand him the throne, I decided to take him out of the equation entirely. I called a staff meeting, everyone except Dad and Uncle. As of today, I announced, Ryan is no longer part of management. Murmurs spread through the group. Some employees looked relieved. Others just nodded, like they had expected it. He's still family, someone pointed out. I smiled. Exactly. Which means he can come in, sit down, and enjoy a meal like the rest of the customers. But he doesn't make decisions. He doesn't give orders. And he definitely doesn't collect a paycheck. A few people clapped. Ryan didn't take it well. You can't do this, he snapped later that night, storming into my office. Dad and Uncle won't let you. They already did, I said, pulling out the signed agreements they had given me months ago. This isn't their call anymore. You're such a selfish asshole, he spat. You act like you're better than us. I met his glare without flinching. No, Ryan. I just work harder than you. He left in a rage. Dad and Uncle called me in for a meeting that same night. You're overstepping, Uncle warned, voice low and angry. I'm running this business, I corrected. You brought me in to fix it. That's what I'm doing. Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. You need to put family first. I laughed. Actually laughed. That's rich, coming from you. When have you ever put me first? They had no answer. The next day, I finalized my exit strategy. I had spent the last several months turning this place into something profitable again. Not for them. For me. Because I knew this moment would come. I made some calls. I had contacts now, investors, business owners, people who actually understood how to run a company. And within a week, I had a buyer lined up. When I walked into the final meeting with Dad and Uncle, I slid a folder across the table. What's this? Uncle asked, flipping it open. His face paled. I'm selling my shares, I said casually, leaning back in my chair. At market value. Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You can't. I can, I said smoothly. And I am. This is extortion, Uncle hissed. No, I corrected. This is business. They tried to fight it. They begged, they threatened, they raged. But in the end, they had no choice. They didn't have the money to buy me out, and the buyer I had lined up wasn't interested in negotiating. I walked out of that meeting wealthier than I had ever been in my life. And they? They were left scrambling, grasping at a business they had already lost. 3 months later, the first restaurant shut down. 6 months later, another. Now, a year later, only one location is still standing. Barely. The reviews are brutal. Customers complain about long wait times, rude service, bad food. The empire my grandfather built is crumbling, and the people responsible are still too stubborn to admit they were the problem. And me? I'm free. I built something for myself. I built something real. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel guilty about walking away. A year after I walked away for good, I drove past the last remaining restaurant. The sign was still there, but the lights inside were dim. A few cars were in the parking lot, but nothing like the packed weekends it used to have. The name, once something I was chained to, now felt like a relic of the past. I parked across the street and just watched for a few minutes. It was surreal. This place had taken so much from me. My time, my energy, my childhood. And now, it was barely standing. Part of me thought I would feel regret, that I'd feel some lingering attachment, some pull to go inside, to check on things. But all I felt was relief. I was free. The fallout had been predictable. Ryan, despite all their grand plans, had done exactly what I expected, nothing. He strutted around as if he was in charge, but he didn't know how to manage a failing business. When the investors I sold my stake to tried to implement changes, he pushed back, claiming tradition mattered more than efficiency. He let the quality slide, refused to adapt to modern marketing, and ran off whatever competent staff was left. The investors pulled out within 6 months. Ryan was left scrambling, Dad and Uncle were drowning in debt, and the restaurant, once a thriving legacy, was now a sinking ship. And the worst part? They still blamed me. I heard it from mutual connections. If he hadn't left, we'd still be doing fine. He sabotaged us. He took advantage of his own family. They still didn't get it. I had given them everything. I had saved them once, only for them to throw me away when they didn't need me anymore. And when I left on my own terms, when I refused to be their safety net, they saw it as betrayal. But I didn't care anymore. I had moved on. After selling my stake, I used the money to start my own firm, something I had always wanted to do. I built a business the right way. I treated my employees with respect, paid them what they were worth, and created something that actually had a future. And unlike them, I never had to beg someone to stay. I pulled away from the parking lot, giving the restaurant one last glance through the rearview mirror. It was barely holding on. Just like them. And just like them, I knew it wouldn't last much longer. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I drove off, the weight of the past finally lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was completely, undeniably free. And damn, it felt good.